Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got two shocking reports of encounters with some unknown cryptid that lurks in the American wilderness. First, four occupants in a car were riding on a rural road in West Virginia when they observe a group of upright dark creatures walking out in a field. And then, in a report forwarded to me from the lovely Kitty over at Pine Box Tales, a man has a terrifying experience when he's attacked in his tent while on a camping trip. You don't want to miss this one, so grab your boots and let's ride to cryptid country. Number 1. Dear Tattooed Biker, this happened on a Sunday morning at about 10:30 a.m. 4 of us were in a small car, and we'd gone to the top of a hill where you could see fields and hills just rolling off into the distance. In those fields, there were a few bushes and trees scattered throughout, and the car was sitting perpendicular to this particular one. That's when I looked up and saw 4 very dark and large creatures walking upright across the hill. At first, I thought they were bears, but why were there 4? And why were they walking on 2 legs? They were taller than the bushes, but not quite as tall as the mature apple trees. They all looked somewhere between 7 to 12 feet tall. They were very dark, very, very dark for how bright it was. Although they appeared hairy, I really couldn't make out any features, except that they were shaped very much like large, overly muscular humans, with large heads, large shoulders, an enormous chest, and extremely long arms. I'm just sitting in the back seat, behind the driver, closest to this field. When I yelled out for everyone to look, I could see 4 of them, but one was already disappearing over the crest of the hill. As the driver looked up, he only saw 3, and then my girlfriend beside me saw them, and by then there was only 2. The last person only saw 1. So they had covered a good 80 to 100 yards in mere seconds, but it seemed to be lumbering along. I guess none of that part really matters, but it kind of really freaked us out. Was this some kind of warning or foreboding? I would go first, and then the driver, and so on. We had planned to get out of the car and hang out up there for a while, but it was so eerily quiet. There were no cows, no birds, and even the insects seemed quiet. There was no odor, but we were downwind. It scared us 4 country kids pretty well. The unnatural silence was what really got us, so we immediately decided to leave and go somewhere else. By the way, Biker, this occurred in Tucker County, West Virginia. Thanks for reading. Signed, Lynn. Number 2. Hi, my name is Phil and I live in Maine. I used to love camping, hiking, skiing, fishing, and kayaking. You get the idea. And early in my life, I decided to live in a non-traditional way. I didn't want to get married or have children. I had relationships, but because I wanted to spend so much time doing these things that I loved, it just wouldn't work well if I were a husband and father. So back in 2000, I was 33, and then I was going camping nearly every single weekend from May until late September. My cousin Joel lives in Maine also. He has a large amount of land, and he was always okay with me setting up to camp whenever I wanted. A weekend in midsummer was coming up, and I decided to take a Friday off so I could go camping from Thursday after work until Sunday afternoon. I arrived Thursday evening and set up in a spot that I was very accustomed to camping. It was so peaceful and relaxing that I felt like I really needed to unwind that weekend. You see, I had a stressful job, and I was really looking forward to that weekend to just clear my mind. So, as I said, I got there Thursday night, and by Friday, I was already feeling better, like my stress had just melted away. That night I was relaxing in my tent, reading a chapter or two of a book by flashlight, and it wasn't long before I was beginning to feel sleepy. It must have been around 10 p.m. when I finally fell asleep. Well, I wasn't asleep very long when I was awoken by the sound of footsteps, and it seemed like they were going around my tent in a circular pattern. Realizing that I couldn't tell yet whether it was a person or an animal, I chose to just stay quiet and not move. Whatever it was, it stopped just outside the door of my tent, so I slowly reached for my hunting knife. Whatever it was must have heard me move, because I heard it move away from my tent, and I could hear footsteps continue to move further away. At some point, I eventually fell back to sleep, but was awoken again to someone or something walking around my tent again. This time, I had my knife right by my side. Once again, I hear the footsteps stop right in front of my little tent door. I had this sudden feeling come over me that something was about to happen. That's when I started to hear loud sniffing right where my head was. So I sat up, not caring anymore if they or it heard me move. The next thing that happened wasn't something that I could have predicted. I was so shocked because my tent started being dragged with me inside of it. My tent, along with me, were being pulled fast. I tried to get out, but I was being bounced around and hurt by everything I was hitting, like the rocks and trees. And I was screaming over and over to stop, stop. I was still being dragged, but I was able to make a slit in the tent with my knife. It wasn't enough for me to get out through, but when I was able to reach over and cut another slit in the tent, I was finally able to roll out of that tent. I watched as my tent continued to be dragged into the forest by some dark creature. There was only the moonlight, but it was enough to see that it looked like a person that dragged me in my tent. I rolled out of view, trying my best to both get away and hide at the same time. I was terrified that this thing would come looking for what was inside that tent. Me. As I was trying to get away, I fell and then rolled down a steep hill. Where I landed after that tumble down that hill is where I stayed. I tried to stay hidden as best I could, but I didn't feel like it was safe to be walking around in the dark woods with injuries and not knowing exactly how to get out. Everything that had just happened left me feeling really disoriented. Plus, that huge, dark creature might be out there somewhere, angrily hunting for me. Maybe I was supposed to be its dinner. I wonder if there was more than just one. And that's when I started hearing this howling, a loud howling like I'd never heard before. I couldn't even tell which direction it was coming from. I tried to assess my situation. I figured that I rolled down the hill about 30 feet or so, and I could feel that my arms and legs were bleeding. It just kept howling, and I instantly knew that it was that creature. I've never heard that sound before. And then it sounded like there were at least two of them, and I didn't dare move in case this thing would hear me. So I hid, sitting still and silent for a long time. I eventually fell asleep, but I don't think it was for very long. That howling went on and on for quite a while. I eventually fell asleep again, and this time when I woke up, I didn't hear anything, and the sun was shining in my eyes. I looked at my injuries, and they were hurt, but didn't seem very serious. I didn't have anything on my feet, but I still had to walk back. When I finally got up to the top of the hill, I decided to follow the drag marks back to where I'd been camping. I had to move slow, being barefoot. Along the way, I located my knife and picked it up. It took me quite a while, but eventually I made it back to the campsite. I found my shoes there and put them on, and I got out of there. My body was hurting all over, and I was really starting to feel everything I'd hit while being dragged. So I left and went to my cousin's house, which wasn't very far away. As soon as he saw me, he said, "Holy crap, what happened to you?" That's when I explained everything to him. And then I cleaned up and dressed a few cuts and borrowed some clothes. The next day, we went back to where I was camping on the ATVs and then followed the drag marks. We eventually came to a spot where my tent was, all shredded and broken, and the area nearby looked like a tornado had gone through it. Even though we were armed, Joel said hurriedly, "Let's go." I don't know what did all this, but we aren't prepared to face off with it. It looked like someone went through the area with heavy equipment. Joel said no animal or man could do this. There were actual trees thrown around everywhere. Later, after we got back to Joel's house, he told me that he's been hearing strange howling for a few weeks, but didn't know what it was. It always sounded far away, so he didn't give it much thought. I never did get a good look at that creature, but all I can say is that it was huge, maybe even 9 feet tall. It was dark, on 2 legs with huge, long arms. This thing looked like it was built like a power lifter. I had really loved the outdoors, but I never went again. Once that you know for sure what's out there, it completely takes away the peaceful feeling of nature. Well, at least it did for me. And there it is. 2 real reports of encounters with something in the forest. So what were these creatures? I could venture a guess, but I'm eager to hear your thoughts and theories down in the comment section below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter or a strange experience that you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. And a special thanks to Kitty over at Pine Box Tales for sending me Phil's story to share with you guys. She's a fantastic narrator, and if you aren't familiar with her channel, I'll leave a link in the pinned comment. And I invite you to go check her out. Anyways, until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker.